There's a special kind of person. They're called raiders. They're the ones who step up to fight the monsters that threaten everything. They hunt down demons inside dungeons and find incredible treasures. By doing this, they protect all of humanity. People call them heroes. They've become celebrities, objects of envy. It's a job that excites people. That's what a raider is supposed to be. But there's something most people don't know. They don't know when a raider's heart truly beats the fastest. It's not in the heat of battle. It's in the moment, right before you're taken out. It's the moment right before you're taken out. And that brings us to my situation. I was in a cafe when I got a job offer, and I completely lost it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I yelled, asking if he was seriously trying to hire me as a meat shield. The man just tried to calm me down, reminding me that I was desperate for money, and that's when it clicked. I finally understood why they wanted me for this raid. This guy is Jung Wooman. He works for the Raider Agency, finding jobs for people like me who don't belong to a guild. Because of that, when he finally contacted me, I figured he'd definitely have a good job lined up, but the job was basically a suicide mission. He wanted me to be a shield bearer in a dungeon full of the undead. It was a disposable role, someone to be abandoned in times of danger. I couldn't believe this was the only job available to me. Wooman looked at him with pity, telling him that he already knew the reason why. Jae-hyun was furious. He demanded to know if he was being underestimated, just because he was a martial arts raider. Wooman couldn't even look him in the eye. He admitted that, realistically, Jae-hyun was right. He explained that mages were just a better investment. Martial artists were slower at clearing dungeons and got injured way more often. And it was true. Mages stayed safely in the back, while martial artists had to be on the front lines, taking all the hits. Jae-hyun clenched his fist. He knew it was all true. 10 years ago, things were different, but now there was no place for his class. He couldn't help but think he should have become a mage. His mind went back to his third year of high school. He'd received amazing results on his awakened aptitude evaluation, getting him into the top Raider Academy. His aptitude for magic was a shocking 97%. To put that in perspective, even Seo Ina, one of the best mages in the country, only had a score of 92. What Jae-hyun had was an unbelievable gift. His aptitude for martial arts, on the other hand, was just 34%. It wasn't even close to his potential as a mage. But in the end, he still chose to become a martial artist. He didn't have some big, noble reason for picking it. It was just that, back then, people had a terrible opinion of mages. He chose a different path from everyone else. Their only real use was for buffing others. They couldn't even fight low-level monsters without a martial artist protecting them. He couldn't help but wonder, if he'd chosen to be a mage 11 years ago, would his life be better now? But a raider's growth usually stops when they turn 20. There was no point in regretting it now. Nothing was going to change. Back in the present, Wooman leaned in. He told Jae-hyun that opportunities like this were rare, and that he'd actually thought of him first before offering it to anyone else. Jae-hyun clenched his fist. All that potential, and he was still just an insignificant D-rank martial artist. His life was nothing like he'd imagined it would be. He finally made up his mind. He'd do it. The decision hung in the air between them. He knew he never really had a choice. To survive in this business, you couldn't just pick the safe jobs. Wooman's face lit up, telling Jae-hyun he'd made the right decision. Jae-hyun told him to be at the address he sent by 8 a.m. tomorrow, and not to be late. Wooman was surprised, asking why Jae-hyun would show up when he was so busy with agency work. Jae-hyun just told him not to worry about it and to focus on his own job. He explained that he had other business there as well. The next day arrived. This was the meeting spot, the entrance to an A-rank dungeon. Raiders were gathered everywhere, getting ready to go inside. Jae-hyun waited by himself, leaning against a tree. He was getting tired of standing around. He pulled out his phone. It was almost 9. He muttered to himself, annoyed that Jung Wooman was so late. He let out an irritated sigh. If Wooman wasn't coming, he should have just said so. But then a thought crossed his mind. Maybe it was better this way. Wooman probably had more capable raiders to manage. He glanced over at the other teams getting ready. It just didn't make any sense. Jae-hyun was only a D-rank martial artist. Jung Wooman, on the other hand, was an A-rank mage. He couldn't figure out why someone that powerful would work for the Raider Agency. With his skills, Wooman could join any guild he wanted. Instead, he was wasting his time here. Jae-hyun thought to himself that if he had Wooman's skills, he'd find a much better place to work. The thought triggered a dark memory from his past. He remembered someone calling him an useless bastard. Suddenly, a voice called his name, pulling him back to the present. It was Myung-cho, another raider, waving him over with a friendly smile. Jae-hyun admitted that work had been slow lately. Even though this job was dangerous, it paid well. Myung-cho complained that kids these days don't appreciate how cool the martial arts class is. They just want to shoot fireballs from the back. But another martial artist nearby scoffed at the idea. He said there was nothing cool about starving to death from a lack of work. Myung-cho tried to lighten the mood, suggesting they all go for a drink after the raid was over. Jae-hyun agreed, but his eyes were cold. He was just playing along. Myung-cho suddenly realized he didn't have any money on him. Then he remembered he was the one who paid last time anyway. Jae-hyun just watched him, a small, knowing smile on his face. The older man was clearly feeling the pressure. Finally, he just gave in. He sighed and promised to pay for everyone again, just this one last time. Jae-hyun smiled to himself, thinking how naive Myung-cho was. He felt a little sorry for the guy, always owing him favors. Just then, Jung Wooman called out from the dungeon entrance, telling everyone to gather up. It was time to start. Jung Wooman announced that they would be entering the dungeon in 30 minutes. The other raiders looked tired, just waiting for things to begin. Jae-hyun took a slow breath. He knew it was time to get ready. He stepped away from the others, finding a quiet spot by a tree. He was running through the rules of survival in his head. There were 2 things every raider had to watch out for in a dungeon. The first thing to be careful of is getting unexpectedly lucky. Inside a dungeon, good fortune can be a death trap. Finding something amazing makes a raider excited and causes them to let their guard down. That's when they can't think straight, and it's the most dangerous moment. For example, 2 raiders might stumble upon a treasure chest. The dungeon then tests them. Is this the best luck they could have hoped for, or is it just a terrible trap dressed up as a prize? As he was about to think of the second rule, someone called out to him, asking what he was doing. One of the other raiders walked over, noticing Jae-hyun was staring at his phone again. He pointed out that Jae-hyun always did this before a dungeon, and playfully asked if he was looking at a picture of his girlfriend. Jae-hyun just told him it was nothing, but he had a small smile on his face as he looked back down at the screen. He was looking at a picture of his mom. He quietly promised her that he would see her later. With that, he put his phone away. The raid party stood at the entrance to the dungeon, ready to go in. The inside was huge and dark, like an old, broken-down castle. Something about it felt wrong. Before they could even get their bearings, a horde of undead creatures swarmed them. The party leaders started screaming at the front line to hold up their shield, but everyone was panicking. The leader yelled at them to stay in formation. He didn't care about their lives. He just ordered them to hold the line, even if it meant they would all be taken down. Jae-hyun had seen this 100 times before. He was done with it. He decided he couldn't take it anymore. As the front line was about to break, one of the mages began chanting. She called on the flames of Surtur to burn all the enemies in front of her. The spell was massive. Everyone braced for the impact, but Jae-hyun just stood there, watching calmly. A huge wave of fire crashed down on the undead, swallowing them whole. The creatures were burned to ash in an instant. As the flames died down, the path ahead was clear. Jae-hyun didn't even seem surprised. He just watched the last of the embers fade away. That's when another group walked in. It was the Meteor Guild, a team of mages known for being new but incredibly powerful. Jae-hyun watched them. With a guild that strong here, he figured he probably wasn't going to die today. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, a different team was waiting for their turn. The warrior took a long drink, looking completely refreshed after the fight. He let out a tired sigh and mentioned that only the boss room was left. Jae-hyun sat quietly beside him. The warrior started complaining about getting old, wishing he'd worked harder to level up when he was young. Jae-hyun just smirked, reminding the man that he still had plenty of energy and was a higher level than him anyway. His companion then asked Jae-hyun if he'd gotten any item drops, since A-rank dungeons usually had good loot. Jae-hyun said he didn't think so, but he pulled up his system window just to be sure. He tapped the glowing screen, scrolling through the information. But then, he paused. He'd just noticed something. As he was looking through his items, the system window suddenly started to glitch and break apart. He had no idea what was going on. The light from the broken screen flickered across his face. This wasn't just a simple bug. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head, and he grabbed his temple. He tried to shake it off, wondering what that sudden jolt was. That's when a new message popped up right in front of him. The system announced it was down, and that the connection to all users would be cut. This had never happened before. Then, another message appeared. The system had tried to reboot, but it failed. Jae-hyun stared at the screen, completely lost. A system failing to reboot? That wasn't supposed to be possible. As the system alerts faded, glowing lights appeared around Jae-hyun. Then, a voice echoed in his mind. It told him to follow the light. The command was so sudden, it made him jolt. He was still trying to understand what was happening when another message popped up. The system announced that an unknown being had broken in. It was trying to switch to safe mode to protect itself. But a second later, another message flashed. The restore had failed. An unknown existence. Jae-hyun realized that must have been the voice he just heard. He muttered the strange instruction to himself, trying to make sense of it. Turns out, he'd spoken out loud. One of his teammates turned to him, asking what he'd just said. Jae-hyun tried to explain what just happened. He told his teammate that a voice had just asked him to follow a light, and right as he said it, a glowing orb appeared out of nowhere. Then another one popped up, and another. Soon, the whole area was filled with these strange, floating lights. He had no idea what was going on. He wondered if these were the lights the voice had told him to follow. His teammate looked at him with concern, asking if he was feeling okay. He pointed out that Jae-hyun had been acting weird for a while now. Jae-hyun insisted he was fine, but then he asked a crucial question. Was he the only one who saw all of that? The lights didn't just float there. They started moving, leading a path deeper into the darkness. Jae-hyun made his choice. He had to find out what this was. His teammate called out, asking where he was going. Without stopping, Jae-hyun just said he'd be back in a moment. As he walked forward, his eyes suddenly began to glow. He had no idea what was going on. He followed the glowing lights deeper, right into the mouth of a dark cave. They gathered in front of him, pulsing with a strange energy. As he got closer, he reached out, trying to figure out what they were. But before he could touch the wall, a system window flickered in front of him. It was completely broken. The message was shocking. The Acer system was down, and his status window couldn't be loaded. He stared at the glitching screen, muttering to himself that it really wasn't working. This had never happened before in all his years as an awakened. Then another message popped up. The system said a feature was damaged, and it was trying to reboot in safe mode. Jae-hyun was completely lost. He grabbed his head, wondering what in the world was going on. He'd been an awakened since he was 10. In all those 17 years, the system had never gone down, never been damaged, and never needed a reboot. He thought about the voice he'd heard. It was almost certain that it was related to the system going down, a mysterious voice telling him to follow a light. It was all too strange. He stared into the darkness, a heavy feeling settling in. Something fundamental was changing within the Acer system. The Acer system. It was named after the gods themselves. It was believed to have come from the Asgardian gods, like Odin and Thor. For a world on the edge of collapse, it was humanity's last line of defense. His mind went back to how it all started 20 years ago. The year was 2011. It would later be known as the Year of Disaster. Out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a giant tree began to grow. It just appeared one morning, out of nowhere. In only 9 days, it grew so big that it covered the entire sky. Some people thought it was a sign of the world's end, while others believed it was a blessing. But the tree had a real name. It was Yggdrasil, the world tree from the old stories. Once the tree was fully grown on that 9th day, that's when the tragedies began. The world was plunged into a disaster. They were simply called monsters. Half of all people were gone because of them, and of those who survived, many were lost to sickness and hunger. Everyone was struggling, completely lost in despair. But then, someone appeared in the middle of all the chaos. He walked forward without any fear. The monsters, who had been hunting freely, suddenly stopped. That's when a small hope for humankind was born, and for the first time, the monsters began to run. The man stood his ground against a huge monster, but he wasn't afraid. He just smiled and raised his hand, gathering a strange, dark power. This was the first awakened, a human who could fight back with the power of a god. These new heroes were called Raiders, and they hunted the monsters using a special power given to them, and their greatest weapon was the Acer system. But now, that very system was acting strange, and Jae-hyun had a bad feeling. This was just the beginning. He looked around at the strange green flames lighting the path. He followed the lights deeper into the dungeon. The path ended at a huge, glowing door carved right into the rock. He stared up at it, confused. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. Then, a huge grin spread across his face. He knew exactly what this was. A treasure gate. These were secret rooms that almost never appeared in dungeons. Inside, you could find incredibly rare items and materials. Just one item from a place like this could be worth a fortune. He thought about what this meant. If he could find A-rank gear in there, he could finally escape his boring life. This was his chance. He stood at the entrance, making a silent wish. He prayed for an A-rank item, something that could finally change his entire life. He stepped through the gate into a breathtaking space. It was like walking through a galaxy. Huge pillars of light stretched up into a starry sky. He couldn't believe a place like this existed inside a dungeon. The stories he'd seen on TV were real, after all. And there, in the center of it all, was a single item on a pedestal, glowing with immense power. A confident smile spread across his face. That had to be it. He walked closer, ready to find out what kind of amazing treasure was waiting for him. He reached out his hand to claim it. The moment he touched the glowing object, a system message popped up. It said he had successfully restored a damaged part of the system. Another message appeared, telling him he'd earned a new piece of equipment. A smile crept across his face. It felt like everything was finally going his way. He opened the item's details. It was called Odin's Lost Eye, and its rank was Mythic. The description said it was the only one in the entire world. He stared at the word Mythic. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The power coming from the item was overwhelming. As he processed the information, his own eyes began to glow with a strange light. Then, another window appeared. He had gained a new skill called Absolute Calculation with an unheard of EX rank. The skill allowed him to destroy magic, use spells without casting, and even copy an opponent's abilities. The power was so unbelievable, he had to wonder if it was even real. Jae-hyun's mind started racing. The best items ever sold at auction were S rank, and they went for hundreds of millions. And this was on a whole other level. A mythic item. There was only one in the entire world, and it was right here in his hands. This was his ticket out. He wouldn't have to work his ass off anymore. No more being looked down on or used as a meat shield in dungeons. His boring life as a raider was finally over. He thought to himself that he might as well try it on. When else would he get the chance to wear a mythic item? It should be fine to just put it on once before he sold it. But as he went to equip it, a system window popped up with a warning. Odin's Lost Eye would be permanently owned once equipped. It asked him if he was sure. He stopped immediately, letting out a huge sigh of relief. That was close. He'd almost wasted the most valuable thing he'd ever found. There was no reason for him to equip it. He could get hundreds of millions for it on the black market. Even with an amazing item like this, he had no desire to stay in the dungeons any longer. He looked at the glowing item. Besides, he was over 20 years old. His level was pretty much capped, so he couldn't even use something this powerful to its full potential. It just didn't make sense for him to keep it. On top of that, the system was down. This whole situation was completely new and unexpected. But then again, he was a raider. He was so used to things going wrong that he was almost fed up with it. In dungeons, unexpected things happened all the time. That was just part of the job. These situations usually fell into one of two groups, fortune or misfortune. With that thought, he decided it was time to head back with the others. One of his teammates was trying to calm everyone down. He figured Jae-hyun probably just had to use the bathroom and would be back any minute. He told them to to just wait a little longer. That's when he saw someone approaching in the distance. Another one of his teammates called out his name as Jae-hyun finally walked back into view. As he got closer, one of his teammates yelled at him to hurry up, saying the attack was about to start. The team leader didn't look happy. He told Jae-hyun he couldn't just run off on his own like that. Jae-hyun bowed his head and apologized, promising to be more careful. With that, the mage turned and walked away, leaving the two of them in silence. His teammate looked over at him, clearly worried, but Jae-hyun just stood there, facing away from him. The armored warrior put a hand on his shoulder, trying to cheer him up. Jae-hyun turned around with a big smile, brushing off the concern. He insisted that he was fine. Then he did something even stranger. He announced that drinks were on him tonight, saying he couldn't always be the one getting free stuff. His teammate just stared, totally confused by the sudden change. Without another word, Jae-hyun walked ahead to join the rest of the party, leaving his friend watching with a worried look on his face. His teammate could only watch, wondering if Jae-hyun had finally lost his mind. But Jae-hyun wasn't crazy. He was just thinking about the mythic item he'd found and how it had changed everything. He took a quiet breath. The strange event was over for now. He remembered exactly where he was. A dungeon is a place with no rules, where anything can happen and no one outside will ever know. Talking about getting a good item here would be the same as asking to die. He decided it was best to just finish the raid as planned. He had to avoid drawing any unwanted attention to himself. A massive attack erupted from the ground. Tearing through their ranks. Jae-hyun barely had time to react as the ground beneath them just exploded. The blast sent everyone flying. People were screaming, caught completely off guard. Jae-hyun hit the ground hard. He had no idea what was going on. But then, a strange purple fog started to fill the air. This wasn't a monster attack. His teammates started coughing and choking, struggling to breathe. Jae-hyun quickly covered his mouth. He realized it was a poisonous fog. He knew if he stayed in it for too long, he wouldn't make it out alive. Just then, one of his teammates called out his name. One of his teammates shouted for everyone to get out, realizing the fog was deadly. But through the purple haze, a figure appeared. This wasn't a monster. Another raider tried to yell a warning, but he was cut down before he could even finish. Jae-hyun's eyes went wide. This was an ambush. He turned just in time to see the assassin's glowing blade sticking right through his friend's chest. Someone screamed his name, Myung-ho. The attacker ripped his sword out, and Myung-ho fell to the ground. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, ready for the next one. With his last breath, Myung-ho choked out a warning, telling Jae-hyun to run. The assassin stepped forward, and Jae-hyun could only gasp, unable to move. Jae-hyun's mind raced, replaying everything that just happened. It started with sudden explosions. Then the assassins appeared, moving like shadows through the chaos. A poisonous fog had filled the entire dungeon, choking everyone, and one by one, his teammates were cut down. He fell to his knees, struggling to breathe. It was all too much. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't a random monster attack. This was a planned dungeon assassination, meant to wipe out his entire guild. He realized running for the exit was useless. They'd just be waiting for them. He was furious, wondering why any of this was happening. But he shook his head, knowing this wasn't the time to fall apart. He'd worked too hard to get that mythic item. He wasn't going to die here. He took a steadying breath. The assassin was walking right toward him. Without warning, the assassin unleashed a powerful fire attack. Jae-hyun raised his blade just in time to block it. The force of the blast was huge, and he grunted as he was pushed back. Just as he recovered, a new voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't the assassin. Someone else was here. A figure in a hoodie stepped out from the smoke. The firelight behind him made it impossible to see his face. Jae-hyun's eyes widened. He knew this person. He muttered the name, Jung Woo-min. The man pulled back his hood, revealing a pair of glasses and a calm smile. He just gave a small greeting. He looked right at Jae-hyun and asked if he remembered what he'd said earlier. He reminded Jae-hyun that he'd promised to come see him. As he spoke, golden energy crackled around his hand. This guy was no ordinary visitor. Jae-hyun stared, the name barely a whisper. He couldn't believe who was standing in front of him. His confusion turned to anger. He demanded to know if Woo-min was behind all of this. Jae-hyun pressed him, asking if he was the one who released the poison fog and attacked the Meteor Guild. Woo-min just smiled and admitted that yes, it was all him. Then, his calm expression just broke. He started grinning like a madman. Jae-hyun's eyes went wide. This wasn't the person he thought he knew. He clutched his wounded shoulder, trying to stay calm. He just needed to understand why. Woo-min shrugged like it was nothing. He said he was just doing what his client paid him to do. He continued, adding that there were plenty of people who disliked the Meteor Guild. Woo-min claimed they looked down on everyone else, so it was no surprise they had enemies. He talked about dungeon assassination contractors who used the closed-off spaces to their advantage. Their whole job was to go inside and eliminate everyone. It was a terrible crime that used a blind spot in the law, and the proof was lying all around Jae-hyun. He was furious, but he felt completely trapped. He wondered if he could take him on, but he knew it was impossible. Jung Woo-min was an A-rank magician, one of the top geniuses in the entire country. And compared to him, Jae-hyun was just a D-rank. He wasn't the weakest, but he wasn't strong either. He was completely outmatched. He tried to calm himself down. He figured he wasn't their real target. If he just kept his mouth shut, maybe they'd let him go. But then he remembered. The Acer system was down. There was no guarantee he could even get out of here alive. He knew it was cowardly, but he felt helpless. A part of him desperately wanted to avenge his comrades, especially Myung-ho, who had died trying to save him. But as he looked at Jung Woo-min, he knew it was impossible. Realistically, there was nothing he could do. So he made up his mind. He was going to pretend he didn't see a thing. Jaehyun decided to try and talk his way out of it, calling out to Jung Woomin. But before he could even finish his sentence, Woomin attacked. A massive blast of fire and lightning tore through the dungeon. Jaehyun somehow managed to block the worst of it, but he was thrown back. His heart was pounding. He knew if he had reacted even a split second later, he would have been gone. He looked up and saw Woomin just standing there, smiling at him. Woomin pointed right at him and explained that the Meteor Guild wasn't the only target here. Suddenly, the fiery energy shot forward, wrapping around Jaehyun's arm like a chain. The fiery chain around Jaehyun's arm pulsed with energy. Then, it just exploded. The blast sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, blood dripping down his face. He was furious. Looking up, he saw Woomin just standing there, smiling. Jaehyun knew he had to get out of there, no matter what. But the fiery chain was still wrapped around his arm. His mind was racing. Why was this happening? He was just a D-rank raider. He couldn't think of anything he'd done wrong. Across from him, Woomin just casually prepared his next attack. Jaehyun desperately tried to figure out who could possibly want him gone, but he was out of time. A black hand made of pure energy grabbed him by the throat. He couldn't breathe. He had to think of something, and fast. He couldn't understand who would want him gone this badly. And then, a memory came flooding back. He remembered a dark, imposing figure from his childhood. A voice that always called him a useless fool. The voice even questioned why he was born at all. Those words still cut deep, even after all this time. Suddenly, everything started to make a terrible kind of sense. He looked at the man in front of him, and finally considered the one person he never wanted to suspect. Could it be his own father? The golden energy crackled around Jung Woomin, filling the air. Jaehyun just stood there, watching him, waiting. Woomin brought a hand to his mouth, trying to hide a smile. He seemed to tower over Jaehyun, a wall of power against a lone fighter. Then he couldn't hold it in anymore. He just threw his head back and laughed. He finally calmed down, a smug look on his face. He grinned, telling Jaehyun he was impressed he figured it out so fast. He said that's why he liked him. Jaehyun's expression didn't change. The worst thing he could imagine was true, and another memory surfaced. His father, standing beside a woman whose face was lost to darkness. Jaehyun looked straight at him, his face covered in blood. He said he just wanted to ask one thing. His question brought back a terrible memory. He remembered that winter, years ago, and the unbearable sadness that came with it. Snapping back to the present, he asked Woomin if his father had made a similar request to him. Woomin just smiled. He admitted he was surprised Jaehyun had figured it all out. He looked genuinely impressed, calling it incredible. But Jaehyun's expression was pure fury. Woomin kept talking, saying he really didn't understand it. He wondered how a father could ask such a thing of his wife, and then his own son. As he spoke, his golden energy began to form a sharp blade. The golden blade flew right at him, but Jaehyun held his ground, focusing on the strange object floating in front of him. Woomin just smiled, asking if Jaehyun thought the whole situation was cruel. He then said his goodbyes, and a massive wave of golden energy exploded from him. Jaehyun just watched, his face completely calm. He didn't even flinch. He had made up his mind. A new window appeared in his vision. The system gave him a single instruction: aim. The object in front of him began to glow, humming with incredible power. This was Odin's lost eye. Woomin just smiled, asking if Jaehyun had any last words. He was sure this was the end, but then his smile vanished. He stared into the blast. Jaehyun was just standing there, completely unharmed. Woomin couldn't believe it. He had never felt a magical power like this before. Jaehyun took a step forward, and the ground cracked under his feet. He just stood there, letting the energy surge around him. Woomin watched, completely stunned. The power wasn't just there. It was getting stronger every second. He knew something was very wrong. He had to finish this now. Woomin decided he was done fooling around. He told Jaehyun it was time to die and gathered all his energy for one final attack. He unleashed a huge wave of golden energy, a blast so big it filled the entire area. But Jaehyun just stood there, watching the attack come right for him. He wasn't scared. He even had a little smirk on his face. That's when his eyes started to glow. Woomin's attack, his ultimate move, just shattered. It broke into a million pieces right before it could hit him. Woomin's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jaehyun just stood there, completely untouched, with his glowing eye fixed on his enemy. The tables had turned. A system message appeared, confirming it. He had equipped Odin's lost eye, and it now belonged to him completely. Jaehyun knew what this meant. He couldn't sell it or get rid of it anymore. This path was permanent. Then another message popped up. The system told him a blank card was now available to be used. Woomin was still screaming. He just couldn't accept what had happened. He finally understood. His magic hadn't been blocked. It had been completely torn apart. But Jaehyun just stood there, solid as a rock, on the shattered ground. He looked over at his enemy and said his name. The system explained that Odin's eye had just used that blank card to create the effect. Then Jaehyun made a promise. He told Woomin he was going to make this as painful as possible. Jaehyun's eye glowed with power. He was done playing games. And just like that, the system confirmed it. Woomin's skill, Blitz Chain, had been copied. Suddenly, the same crackling energy that Woomin used started to form around Jaehyun. It was his power now. He stood there, surrounded by the very magic that was supposed to be Woomin's signature move. Woomin was speechless. He stammered, asking how Jaehyun could possibly be using Blitz Chain. He couldn't believe it. He said it was a skill that took him years to master, so how could a low-rank martial artist possibly use it? Woomin's shock turned to anger. He admitted he didn't know how Jaehyun was using magic, but he sneered, asking if he really thought that was enough to win. Jaehyun calmly told him they were about to find out. He unleashed the full power of Blitz Chain, ready to prove Wooman wrong. The lightning chain shot forward. Wooman barely had time to react, completely stunned by the attack. The golden chain whipped through the air, aimed right at him. It slammed into the ground, right where Wooman was standing, sending rocks flying everywhere. But Jae-hyun wasn't done. He kept the pressure on, whipping the chain around for another strike. Wooman finally snapped out of his shock. He charged forward, his own lightning gathering around him. He wasn't going to be beaten by his own skill. He prepared to launch his own blitz chain, and then he unleashed it, sending a spinning vortex of energy right back at Jae-hyun. The vortex of energy exploded, trapping Jae-hyun right in the center. It looked like he was done for, but then his eyes started to glow. The system announced that his skill, absolute calculation, had just been activated. Suddenly, the energy from Wooman's attack began to twist and change shape. It wasn't Wooman's attack anymore. Jae-hyun had taken control, reshaping the energy into a massive serpent. The serpent lunged straight for Wooman. He could only stare, completely stunned that his own attack was being used against him. Wooman's confidence shattered. He knew he was in serious trouble. At the last second, a blue portal opened up behind him, pulling him to safety. Jae-hyun watched him disappear. His glowing eye told the whole story. He was in complete control now. Wooman saw his own power turned against him. He knew he couldn't escape. A memory flashed through Jae-hyun's mind. The assassin who had taken down his guild. He'd faced this exact same power. The golden weapon had slammed right into him. He never stood a chance. Back in the present, the result was the same. Wooman was on the ground, his glasses shattered as Jae-hyun stood over him. He coughed up blood, completely beaten. Jae-hyun just looked down at him, his face like stone. Wooman started to beg for his life, but Jae-hyun wasn't listening. He summoned the golden weapon, ready to end this for good. He closed his eyes. The fight was over. He opened them again, blood trickling from his mouth. He could barely believe it was finally done. Wooman lay on the ground, completely still. Jae-hyun was the only one left standing. A small smile appeared on his face, but it wasn't one of happiness. It was relief. But that feeling didn't last. He realized he had nothing left. No stamina, no mana. He'd finally gotten a mythic item, only to die right after using it. As a raider, he'd heard the word death countless times, but actually facing it, it was just cold. His vision started to fade as his eyes slowly closed. This was it. But just as his consciousness was fading, a message appeared. A new system had been downloaded, and it was asking if he wanted to proceed. It explained that if he agreed, he could choose a time period to return to. He could go back. He could barely process it. This thing was offering him a chance to live. He had no idea if this would lead to a happy ending or just more pain, but it didn't matter. He told the system to proceed. This was his only choice. There was nothing else he could do. The message window flashed red. A new system, called Norner, was now in effect. And just like that, everything around him dissolved into a bright, golden light. He found himself in a place of pure, golden light. Standing before him were 3 women in white, their eyes covered. They felt ancient and powerful. One of them, with red hair, seemed to speak. He couldn't understand the words, but he could feel their meaning. The woman in the center spoke next, her voice echoing in his mind. They were offering him a new path, a new power, a chance to change his fate. She reached out her hand, waiting for his answer. He didn't hesitate. He took her hand, ready for whatever darkness came with this choice. The moment he did, the system exploded with messages. The first was a warning. He was now a great enemy of the High Aesir, but he had also gained 2 new passive skills. One who is observed by the gods and Supreme God's Eye. The final message made it clear. The gods were already watching him. Jae-hyun's eyes snapped open. He shot up in bed, breathing hard. He looked around, trying to figure out what was happening. His eyes landed on a desk. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. It was a picture of him and his mom. He had no idea what was going on. He stared down at his hands. A system message flashed between them. It confirmed he had successfully returned to a time of his choosing. He couldn't believe it. He wondered if this was all just a dream. He just stayed there, hunched over, trying to process everything. The memories of his final moments were still so clear. He kept asking himself if any of this could possibly be real. He even remembered the man who showed up at the end. It all felt too real to be fake, which meant this had to be a dream. He slowly lifted his head, still trying to take it all in. His eyes went back to the picture on the desk. It was him and his mom from a long time ago. And if this was a dream, it was one he never wanted to wake up from. Her smile was exactly how he remembered it. Without a word, he suddenly pulled his mom into a hug. She was completely caught off guard, not knowing what was happening. He held on tight, tears welling up in his eyes. He'd been telling himself this was all just a really long dream, but this felt too real. He suddenly stumbled back, clutching his chest. A system message appeared, telling him that the constraints on his body had been removed. The message finished, confirming that his body had been successfully healed. He was breathing hard, trying to process the feeling. His eyes glowed as he looked around. He couldn't believe any of this was real, wondering if it was all just a dream. He recognized the room. This was the home he used to live in. At that moment, the system gave him a new quest. It was a simple sub-quest. The system told him he'd miraculously survived and needed to recover his strength. The reward was something called a blank card. He took a deep breath, trying to get his thoughts in order. He needed to figure out exactly what happened, starting from the very beginning. His mind went back to the battle with the man named Young Wooman. He remembered being defeated, lying on the ground. He remembered the feeling of it all ending, but it hadn't. The biggest question he had was, why? He remembered the system's message. It had allowed him to choose a time to return to. That's how he ended up back in the past. But he wasn't panicking. He'd already been hardened by years of fighting monsters. Strange things like this were almost normal for him now, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that adapting and making quick decisions was more important than anything else. If the information from the system was right, he'd been sent back 11 years. He was in his 3rd year of middle school again. A message confirmed it. His operating system had been changed to something called the Norner system. He sat on the edge of his bed. Honestly, the whole thing still felt like a dream. But as he got up and looked at his desk, he knew he had to be sure. One thing was for certain. He reached for the calendar to get his proof. The calendar was marked for the application day to Mills Academy. There was even a note he'd written to himself back then, pushing him to go for martial arts. A confident smile spread across his face. He dropped the pen. The old plan was finished. He knew this was a precious opportunity. A chance to fix everything. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. In this life, he was going to become a mage. Later, at the dinner table, he took a bite of food and immediately recoiled. But the taste didn't matter. He just stared at his plate, completely overwhelmed. He never thought he'd get to have a meal with his mom again. His mother watched him from across the table, a worried look on her face. She could tell something was off, and asked if anything was bothering him these days. He looked his mother straight in the eyes, ready to tell her his decision. She was thinking about how dangerous being a raider was. The competition was fierce, and she knew it wasn't an easy life. She decided that if her son didn't want to go, it was meaningless. That's when Jaehyun spoke up, telling her he wanted to change his major to magic instead. Without any hesitation, she just smiled and said, okay. He was completely floored. He just stared at her, not knowing what to say. She thought about how he'd been so sure about martial arts before, but she knew he was a careful kid, so she trusted that he hadn't made this decision on a whim. The weight of his decision hung in the air between them. She asked if this was something he'd just decided. He smiled and confirmed that he'd been thinking about it for a while. She told him to do whatever he wanted. She said money didn't matter, as long as he was happy. She promised to cheer him on, no matter what he chose. Hearing that, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He quickly told himself this wasn't the time to cry. His thoughts shifted to the man responsible for his past life's misery, Min Sung-oh. He knew what he had to do. He had to get revenge on his father, a powerful A-rank raider. And to do that, he needed to become much, much stronger. Just then, a message from the system popped up. He had completed the quest, A Break is a Mother of Success. As a reward, he got something called a blank card. With his goal set, he didn't waste a single moment. He felt good about his progress. The quest was done, and he had another blank card. Things were starting off smoothly. He still didn't fully understand the Norner system, but he knew it was a huge advantage. Plus, he had memories of the future. He knew where all the hidden items were, and which ruins he could clear all by himself. His memory was perfect. He could even work as a dungeon guide, but there was one big problem: his skills. Aside from a couple of new ones, everything he had was for a martial artist. It made sense, though. At this age, he was still planning on becoming a warrior. He wondered if there was anything he could do to change it. That's when he decided to check his status. The system showed that his level had been reset to 7. All his stats were back to what they were when he was a teenager, but as he looked closer, he saw something strange. His passive skills were exactly as they were before he died. He had no idea why they were the only thing that carried over. Then the system gave him an answer. It was a skill called One Who is Observed by the Gods that let him keep all his old passive abilities. He'd never heard of it before. He pulled up the skill's description. It was an EX rank passive. Not only did it keep his old skills, but it also raised all his stats by 1 every time he leveled up. That was an incredible advantage. But the last line was unsettling. It said the half-gods of Asura were watching him. The idea of gods watching his every move was a heavy thought. He decided to set it aside for now and check his other skills. He had another EX rank passive, Supreme God's Eye, which let him see through illusions. He also still had Blitz Chain, an active skill that attacked with electric chains. He wasn't really sure what Supreme God's Eye did in a fight. He knew from experience that Blitz Chain was a really solid combat skill. Next, he pulled up his own profile. He was back to being 16 years old and level 7. His magic was at 10, but the rest of his stats were low. He had 21 points ready to be assigned. He started planning his build. Since he was going to be a mage this time, strength wasn't that important. He'd need a little dexterity to dodge attacks, but magic was obviously the top priority. But as he looked closer, he saw something strange. The system showed his dexterity had risen by 2, magic by 5, and his endurance had jumped by a massive 14 points. He had no idea where those came from. He realized that massive jump in endurance was actually a huge advantage. It wouldn't make him hit harder, but it meant he could train and level up for way longer without getting tired. With his stats sorted out, he felt like he'd handled the most immediate issues. The next problem was deciding what skill to learn. He already had Blitz Chain for attacking, and with his low mana, he couldn't use any high-level magic anyway. That's when he knew exactly what he needed: a healing skill. He thought about how things were at this point in time. Compared to martial artists, mages were treated like they were worthless. However, that wasn't the case for a raider with a healing skill. They were treated like royalty wherever they went. Even if they weren't raiders, their ability to heal made them incredibly well respected. Jaehyun made up his mind. If he had a healing skill, No one would ever disrespect him again. But he let out a sigh. The biggest problem was that finding an awakened with a healing skill was almost impossible. He knew he had to be careful with his blank cards. What happened with young Wooman was necessary, but he couldn't afford to waste any more of them. He had no idea how many the system would give him, but he was sure it wouldn't be many. An item this powerful was just too good to be common. He was still trying to figure out a way to get what he needed when his phone suddenly started buzzing on the desk. He looked up, surprised, wondering who could be calling him. He reached over and picked up the phone to see who it was. The name on the screen made him pause. It was Kim Yoo-jung. His mind went back in time. Kim Yoo-jung was his childhood friend, his best friend. She was the whole reason he'd ever dreamed of going to Mills Academy to become a raider. But things weren't that simple anymore. But seeing her name brought back the worst memory of his life. The day she was gone forever, right there in his arms. He shook his head, pushing the image away. He told himself it was all right. This time, he could change everything. He had to. He looked back at the message on his phone. She was just as he remembered. She was excitedly asking if he wanted to go see someone famous, the Saintess Yoo Sung-gun, who was holding an event downtown. Hearing that name made his mind race. The Saintess. Yoo Sung-gun was a huge deal back then. She was known for one incredible type of magic, a power called sacrifice. He didn't have to think about it for a second. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. He called out to his mom that he'd be right back. She just told him not to be too late. He quickly replied to the message, telling his friend he'd be right there. With a new plan forming in his mind, he headed out the door. Meanwhile, in a car heading downtown, Yoo Sung-gun, the Saintess, was getting a briefing from her staff. Her schedule was completely packed. A seminar, a dungeon raid, a base inspection, and even a trip to the United States. It was nonstop. The director looked worried. He asked if she was really going to be okay, pointing out that she looked even more tired than usual. She just smiled and brushed it off, saying she was just a little exhausted. He knew it was more than that. He reminded her he'd been overworking herself for months, and that she knew exactly what her power, sacrifice, was doing to her. It was eating away at her life force. He wished there was just one other person with a healing skill as powerful as hers. If there was, maybe she could finally be healed. She just smiled and told him he promised not to bring it up. She squeezed his hand, trying to get him to drop it, but her words didn't calm him down. He knew the truth, and it terrified him. The Saintess of Korea, the most powerful healer in the country, was on the verge of collapsing. She just smiled and told him he promised not to bring it up. She squeezed his hand, trying to get him to drop it. Told him he promised not to bring it up. She squeezed his hand, trying to get him to drop it, but her words didn't calm him down. He knew the truth, and it terrified him. The Saintess of Korea, the most powerful healer in the country, was on the verge of collapsing. Hyun arrived to find his friend, Kim Yoo-jung, waiting for him. She was clearly excited, grabbing his hand and pulling him into the crowd, telling him they had to hurry. He told her to calm down and stop pulling him. They made their way through the massive crowd of people. Jaehyun smirked and started teasing her. He asked if the real reason she invited him was because she was afraid of getting lost. She got flustered and quickly denied it, telling him to let her go. But he didn't let go. She looked away, a little embarrassed. She quickly changed the subject, reminding him that he should be thanking her for the chance to see the famous Saintess, Yoo Sung-gun. He had to admit, his friend wasn't wrong, but he was here for a much bigger reason. If he could just copy Yoo Sung-gun's sacrifice skill, it would be a huge help for his future. It was more than just a skill. It was a way to make the best personal connection in all of Korea. They found their seats in the audience. His friend was practically glowing with excitement, but Jaehyun just sat there calmly, waiting. He looked around at the huge crowd she had drawn. He was definitely impressed. A huge banner hung over the stage, announcing the seminar with Yoo Sung-gun, the guild master of the nation's greatest guild, Lotus. And then she walked out onto the stage. Saintess Yoo Sung-gun. She was a top-tier healer, famous not just in Korea, but across the entire world. Jaehyun remembered this time well. The whole idea of being a raider was still new. She was one of the very first people to step up and protect others. But Jaehyun knew the truth behind the heroic image. He knew what was coming. Yoo Sung-gun greeted everyone with a smile. Jaehyun just watched her, his face serious. To the world, she looked perfect, strong, confident, and completely in control. And the crowd went wild for her, everyone except for Jaehyun, who just sat there with his arms crossed. He knew her future better than she did. In exactly 2 months, everything would change. During a dungeon raid, she would become critically ill, and the cause wasn't some monster. It was her own healing magic, and the very power that made her famous. His friend was still buzzing with excitement, completely unaware of the heavy thoughts on his mind. He finally had enough and told her to be quiet. On stage, Yoo Sung-gun began her speech. She told the crowd that the world was facing a disaster unlike any other, all because of Yggdrasil. She explained that because of the monsters that appeared, countless people had already been lost. She reminded them that things got a little better when the Awakened appeared, but it wasn't enough. Yoo-jung listened, completely captivated by her words. Yoo Sung-gun then revealed a hard truth. Only 20% of the Awakened actually volunteered to become raiders. And while that number was shockingly low, the number of people dying was several times higher. Jaehyun just listened, his expression unchanged. Her eyes were full of conviction. She told them the world was at a critical point, and that even now, innocent people were losing their lives. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles white. She was about to tell them what she needed from them, what they all needed to do. She called out to all the Awakened in the world, telling them that their courage could change everything. Then, she bowed deeply, begging them to become raiders and bring light back to the world. She promised that she and the Lotus Guild would support anyone who stepped up. The crowd was completely moved by her words. She stood there, her speech finished, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Yu Jung was in tears, completely in awe of how amazing Seunggun was. Jaehyun listened quietly. He knew she was right. Most awakened were too scared to fight on the front lines. He even remembered his own past life. Before he'd come back, his plan was to sell a rare item and just live a life of luxury. Yu Jung sighed dreamily, saying that Seunggun was the perfect role model. Yu Jung wasn't impressed, telling him to stop being such a buzzkill. He suddenly told her he had somewhere to be and started to leave. She was shocked, asking what she was supposed to do. He just reminded her that she'd bragged about having a great sense of direction. She got angry, calling him mean. Jaehyun smiled, admitting he was just joking. He told her he'd already called her mom, who was on the way to pick her up. Relieved, she offered him a ride too, asking what was so urgent. He then casually dropped a bombshell. He told her he'd changed his career path to magic, and even asked her to teach him later. Yu Jung was completely stunned, but before she could get an answer, he turned and walked away into the crowd. She yelled after him, asking why he'd make such a big decision without telling her first. She was left standing there, hurt that he would just leave her like that. But Jaehyun was already focused on his real mission. He scanned the area, sure that the saintess, Yu Seunggun, had to be somewhere nearby. It didn't take him long to spot her staff. He saw a man in a suit standing by a limo, busy on the phone. A confident smile spread across his face. He walked right up to him without any hesitation. But another man, probably security, stepped in to block his path. He told Jaehyun that she wasn't taking any gifts from fans right now. Jaehyun just smiled and corrected him. He wasn't there with a gift. He was there to meet director Yu Seunggun. The guard just sighed. He figured Jaehyun was just another crazy fan. He got right in Jaehyun's face, his tone changing completely. He told him there was a line you don't cross, even as a fan, and demanded to know why he'd just show up like this. Jaehyun just calmly told him that wasn't why he was here. Then, he dropped a bombshell. He said he knew director Yu Seunggun was suffering from an untreatable disease, and then he made his move, claiming that he was the one who could cure her. The guard froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A single drop of sweat rolled down his face. His shock quickly turned into pure rage. He lunged forward and grabbed Jaehyun by the collar. He started screaming, demanding to know how he could possibly know that. But Jaehyun didn't even flinch. He just told the man he shouldn't be making such a scene. People were starting to stare. Just then, a voice came from the car. It was Yu Seunggun. She told her guard to wait. The guard turned back to Jaehyun, demanding to know if he could really take responsibility for what he'd just said. Jaehyun just smirked and brushed his hand away. He looked straight at the car and said, of course, he could cure her disease. Inside the car, Yu Seunggun was silent, wondering if he actually had a way to pull this off. After a moment, she made up her mind. She asked her guard how much time they had before their next appointment. He told her they had 2 hours. That was enough. She smiled and told Jaehyun to get in the car. They needed to go somewhere quieter to talk. They went to a quiet room nearby. Yu Seunggun gestured for him to take a seat. Jaehyun sat down across from her, looking completely calm. She didn't waste any time. She got straight to the point, asking him how he knew about her disease. Jaehyun told her he couldn't say. He gave her a choice. He could tell her everything, but if he did, he wouldn't treat her. She was surprised by his confidence. She laughed a little and agreed to his terms. With that settled, she moved on to the real question. She looked him dead in the eye and asked exactly how he planned to treat her. Jaehyun calmly explained his plan. He was going to copy her sacrifice skill. She was completely stunned. Copying her skill sounded impossible, but it wasn't just Yu Seunggun who was shocked. Her director was furious. He slammed his hand on the table, yelling that he'd heard enough. He turned on Jaehyun, demanding to know if he even understood what the skill sacrifice was. He reminded him it was a unique skill, something incredibly rare. He pointed out that not even they knew the formula for it. He demanded to know how some stranger could possibly copy it. And unique skill wasn't like other abilities. It was a tier above even S rank, which was thought to be the highest level possible. These skills couldn't just be learned. They were either passed down through family, or they appeared on their own in very rare cases. They couldn't be copied. The director kept going, explaining that while normal skills could be learned, unique skills had formulas that were impossible to understand. That's why they could never be copied. Jaehyun didn't even flinch. He just said that was what everyone else believed. He told the director to calm down, assuring them he wouldn't have wasted their time if he wasn't absolutely sure he could do it. Before the director could explode again, Yu Seunggun spoke up. She calmly told him that they should at least hear the young man out. She then turned her full attention to Jaehyun, asking him to confirm his plan. He intended to heal her using her own sacrifice skill. Jaehyun confirmed it. He explained that to fix the damage caused by a skills penalty, you need another skill of the same rank or even higher. Since her skill was unique, there was nothing stronger. And because sacrifice couldn't be used to heal herself, his plan was the only way. He then revealed the true meaning behind her power. The skill sacrifice was exactly what it sounded like, an offering made to a god. Jaehyun finished his explanation. Because her skill was an offering, it was impossible for Yu Seunggun to use it to heal herself. It would go against the very nature of the power. She listened to every word. Then, she just smiled and agreed. A golden aura flared up around her. She looked right at Jaehyun and told him to prove it. The director couldn't believe what was happening. He shouted her name, trying to get her to stop, but she paid him no attention. A powerful golden light began to gather in her hands. Jaehyun just smiled. This was exactly what he'd been hoping for. The light from her power turned into tiny particles and floated right toward him. The particles came together, forming a single, glowing card right in his hand. A moment later, A message from the system appeared. It confirmed that he could now learn a new skill. The system asked if he wanted to register sacrifice to the blank card. Without a second thought, he accepted. Yu Seongun just watched with a calm smile. She had put her faith in the stranger, and just like that, it was done. The system confirmed that sacrifice had been registered. He now held her unique power. A small smile spread across his face. He could tell she was still having trouble believing him. He told her he understood, and that he would have to earn her trust first. Then, a new message popped up. He was activating the skill, sacrifice. A brilliant golden light erupted from his hand, exactly like the one she had used just moments before. Yu Seongun and the director stared, completely speechless. It was impossible, but it was happening right in front of them. The golden light of her own unique skill pulsed in his clenched fist. He looked at them with a confident grin. Now that he'd proven he could do the impossible, it was time to negotiate. The system window explained the skill's details. It could heal multiple allies at once, but against undead monsters, it would turn into an attack. And the best part? Since it was a copy, he wouldn't suffer any of the penalties. Jaehyun lowered the card with a confident smirk. He had their full attention. Yu Seongun was clearly impressed. She smiled and asked him directly what he wanted from her guild. She knew that just being able to cure her disease was more than enough reason to take him seriously. But still, she couldn't get over the fact that he was just a middle schooler. She was the representative of the Lotus Guild. How could a child like that even think about negotiating with her? But as she watched him, a small smile formed on her face. She found the whole situation interesting. Jaehyun didn't miss a beat. He looked her right in the eyes and made his request. He wanted her to be his sponsor. Yu Seongun considered his words carefully. She asked if he wanted the guild to sponsor his growth as a raider. Jaehyun confirmed it. He explained that his dream was huge, and to get stronger, he needed money, connections, and a lot of other things. He wanted the Lotus Guild to provide all of it. She smiled, looking impressed. She told him that anyone with the courage to make a demand like this was worth investing in. She admitted he had real skill. Jaehyun just smiled back, his confidence unshaken. But then, she added a condition to their deal. Jaehyun's expression turned serious. He knew she was desperate, that he might be her only hope. But even so, she wasn't losing her cool for a second. He realized this was the kind of composure you'd expect from the leader of the Lotus Guild. She confirmed it again, a calm smile on her face. She had one condition. She made it very clear. Her disease was a personal problem. It had absolutely nothing to do with the Lotus Guild. She pointed out that what he wanted wasn't just her personal help, but the full backing of the entire Lotus Guild. Jaehyun understood her point. Supporting him for no reason would be unfair. He told her he was ready to hear her condition. He was feeling pretty confident. She was the one who needed the cure, so he figured her condition wouldn't be too hard. But then she asked something that caught him completely off guard. Did he already have a guild he wanted to join? Yu Seongun just smiled, looking completely at him and confirmed it. She doesn't joke at him and confirmed it. She doesn't joke about things like this. She told him she had several reasons for making the offer. Her first point was that he'd somehow found out about her disease. She explained it was a secret only a few people knew, which proved he had exceptional information gathering skills. Of course, Jaehyun knew the real reason was because he'd returned from the future, but that was something he could never tell her. She moved on to her second point. He had perfectly copied her unique skill, sacrifice. She explained that copying a unique skill was unheard of. It made her wonder just how many other powers he could learn. His potential was basically limitless. Jaehyun smirked a little and asked if there was a third reason. She confirmed there was, and told him it was the most important one of all. She leaned in close and gave her third reason. What impressed her most was that he wasn't nervous at all, even with her right in front of him. She pointed out that most people would be terrified to meet the Guildmaster of Lotus, but he seemed completely unfazed. A small smile spread across her face. She told him his confidence was charming. With her points made, she asked him if that was enough to convince him to join her guild. Jaehyun thought about her offer. He knew from the future that the Lotus Guild would eventually fall apart after she got sick. But right now, they were the #1 guild in the world. Joining them would give him the best resources and was the fastest way to grow stronger. It was a serious. She told him his confidence was charming. With her points made, she asked him if that was enough to convince him to join her guild. Jaehyun thought about her offer. He knew from the future that the Lotus Guild would eventually fall apart after she got sick. But right now, they were the #1 guild in the world. Joining them would give him the best resources and was the fastest way to grow stronger. It was a seriously good deal, but he pointed out a major problem. He was still a minor, and signing a guild contract at his age was probably illegal. She just smiled, not looking worried at all. She had a way around the whole age problem. She asked if he'd ever heard of something called a right of priority negotiation. Jaehyun knew exactly what that was. It was a huge deal. Basically, it's a special contract for young raiders with massive potential. The guild supports them while they grow, and in return, they get the first shot at signing them once they're old enough. It was an offer only given to monstrous geniuses. He couldn't help but smile. In his past life, an offer like this would have been a complete fantasy. She just watched him, a thoughtful look on her face. She smiled, thinking he still had a cute, childish side to him. She told him to give her his address so she could mail the contract and to think about it carefully. But Jae-hyun wasn't focused on the contract. He told her he was going to heal her first. He knew it was a great offer, but he didn't have to decide right away. First things first, he had to focus on the treatment. The rest could wait. Jae-hyun announced he was ready to begin. Yoo Seong-eun closed her eyes, putting her complete trust in him. The director watched from the side, still not sure what to think. He couldn't make sense of any of it. The whole situation felt impossible, but Jae-hyun was perfectly calm, holding the golden light of her unique skill in his hand. The director was torn. He couldn't deny what he was seeing with his own eyes. They had gone to countless doctors and healers, and none of them could do anything. Even the top experts in the world had failed. He couldn't accept that some kid could just walk in and fix everything so easily. A system message appeared, confirming the skill was active. Jae-hyun pushed the golden energy toward her. The warm, golden light completely surrounded Yoo Seong-eun. She looked up, stunned by the feeling. She could feel it instantly. The damage inside her body was actually being healed. The director watched, completely stunned. He couldn't believe it was actually working. All his doubt just melted away. It was real. The next moment, the director bowed deeply. He apologized for his rudeness and begged Jae-hyun to take care of Yoo Seong-eun. Jae-hyun just waved it off. He told the man he understood why he was so suspicious. The director promised he would make it up to him later. Then, a system message appeared. Not only had he healed her, but his first aid arts skill had leveled up to 19. With the healing finished, Jae-hyun smiled. He told Yoo Seong-eun it was all done and that she should try moving now. Jae-hyun just stood there with a confident smile. Yoo Seong-eun was still processing what had just happened. She slowly turned and walked toward the window, as if feeling her own body for the first time in ages. She raised her hand, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Golden particles of light floated around her. The healing was complete. Tears streamed down her face. She was in disbelief, whispering that all her symptoms were finally gone. She turned to Jae-hyun and thanked him, but she was worried, asking if he would suffer the skills penalty. A system window appeared, explaining that copied skills don't have penalties. Jae-hyun just smirked. He told her not to worry, and if he ever did get hurt, she could just heal him. Yoo Seong-eun smiled back, agreeing to help him anytime. Their deal was sealed. Yoo Seong-eun handed Jae-hyun her card, promising to fulfill his conditions. She told him to call her anytime and to think about the offer they had discussed. But Jae-hyun wasn't ready to end the conversation just yet. He told them he had something he wanted to ask of her right away. The next day, a car pulled up to a new location. The man from the Lotus Guild opened the door for Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun stepped out. He took a moment to look around, taking in the new place. The man beside him started to explain what this place was. The man explained that this was a low-ranked dungeon owned by the Lotus Guild. This was the first part of their deal. Jae-hyun knew that Meal's Academy was filled with geniuses, all competing against each other. To survive in a place like that, he had to level up. A confident smile spread across his face. This was the entrance to the low-ranked dungeon was hidden inside a lush, sunlit cave, sealed by a massive gate. The man from the guild showed Jae-hyun a crate filled with recovery items and other tools. He explained that Jae-hyun could also borrow some spare equipment meant for guild members. Jae-hyun thanked him for his consideration, but the man still looked worried, asking if he was sure he'd be alright. He reminded Jae-hyun that even an E-ranked dungeon is dangerous to enter alone, and asked why he had to do it. Jae-hyun just smiled and said his reason was simple. He just wanted to level up. The man seemed to consider this for a moment. He paused, then reached for something. He pulled out a small, glowing blue crystal. He explained that it was a warp stone. If Jae-hyun ever found himself in a dangerous situation, he just had to break it to be teleported back to the dungeon entrance. He insisted that Jae-hyun take it, saying it was his way of apologizing for being so rude the day before. The man added that it was also a personal thank you for healing the director. He really wanted Jae-hyun to take it. Jae-hyun smiled and accepted the gift, thanking him. He turned to face the gate. The magic power flowing out of it was strong, but he could tell it was just an E-rank dungeon. For him, a place like this wouldn't be a problem at all. The guild member gave him one last piece of advice, telling him to use the warp stone if he got into any trouble. Jae-hyun just smirked. He agreed and told the man he'd be back soon. He took a step forward and a system message popped up. He had officially entered the dungeon. The world around him changed instantly. He was now inside. Suddenly, a strange purple energy grabbed hold of him. The Norner system announced that he was being transported to a specific location. When he could see again, a new message popped up. He was in Helheimer's Field of the Dead. This wasn't a normal E-rank dungeon at all. Meanwhile, miles away, Park Hana sat in her office. She was looking over his file, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help but wonder if he would be all right in that dungeon. She remembered what he had asked of her and the director. He wanted to borrow one of the guild's low-rank dungeons, and he wanted to go in alone. She knew that even for an E-rank dungeon, an aspiring raider clearing it by himself was nearly impossible. She was sure he knew the dangers. So why would he still insist on entering the dungeon by himself? A small smile crept onto her face. She couldn't help but wonder what he was really planning. At the same time, Park Hana arrived at the director's office. The director smiled warmly and told her to come in. Hana opened the door and walked inside. The director immediately asked about the item she had requested. Hana confirmed she had it right there. It was Min Jae-hyun's profile. She took the file from Hana thanking her. Hana knew it was rare for the director to scout someone personally. She realized the woman must already know just how special Jaehyun was. The director opened the folder to look over his details. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The profile listed him as an aspiring martial artist. If that was true, she couldn't understand how he could have possibly used such powerful magic. The director stared at the file, her expression growing more and more serious. Park Hana just stood there quietly, waiting. Her eyes locked onto one specific detail. She was completely silent, taking it all in. The quiet in the office was heavy as Hana waited for a response. Finally, the director looked up, her voice filled with disbelief. She asked if this information could possibly be true. Hana replied calmly that unless the testing machine itself was broken, there was no doubt about it. The file was clear. Min Jae-hyun's magic aptitude was 97%. It was a number that shouldn't even be possible. The director stood up and walked over to the window, trying to wrap her head around what this meant. A moment later, she made a call. With a determined look, she gave a simple order. She wanted to be notified the second Min Jae-hyun came out of the dungeon. On the phone, the director said she wanted to meet him soon. She wanted to see Min Jae-hyun's talent with her own eyes. At that same moment, a system message appeared for Jae-hyun. It announced he was being sent to a new location, Helheimer's Field of the Dead. The world around him twisted into a violent purple storm. He hit the ground hard, the force of the landing knocking the wind out of him. He had arrived. It was a dark, creepy graveyard filled with dead trees and mist. The teleportation had been rough. He struggled to get up, feeling sick to his stomach. He coughed and pushed himself forward, trying to get his bearings in the thick fog. He was already frustrated. This wasn't the clean start he'd been hoping for. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't some simple, low-rank dungeon. Something was seriously wrong. That's when a figure appeared from the shadows. It was a skeleton archer, and it was aiming right at him. Without any warning, it drew its bow. A blue light started to glow at the tip of the arrow. The arrow shot through the air like a bolt of lightning. It hit him dead on, exploding with a huge burst of energy. The force of the blast sent him stumbling back. He gritted his teeth. The attack had actually cut him, drawing blood. He looked back at the skeleton in the distance. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. The skeleton archer just stood there, watching him, its bow ready for another shot. But the cut wasn't the real problem. He could feel a numbness spreading. The arrow was laced with paralysis poison. He was getting annoyed. A golden light surrounded him as the system announced he was activating his skill, Sacrifice. Suddenly, other creatures started to appear. One was immediately hit by a blast of ice, shattering on impact. From the shadows, more figures began to form, wrapped in an eerie purple flame. It wasn't just one or two. An entire horde of the undead was rising up to face him. And in the back, the skeleton archer was already preparing another shot, gathering energy for a powerful strike. He let out a sigh of frustration and clenched his fist. This was getting ridiculous. He snapped the arrow shaft in his hand. A wild grin spread across his face. He wasn't scared. He was absolutely furious.